Did someone say Cubase Feature Request Poll? Today I wanted to do a quick announcement and let you know that Steinberg has made an official Cubase Feature Request Poll. You can see their Twitter page, they've promoted this. I'll leave this link in the description below. So this is the poll webpage, and you can see on the left pane, this is all the various different feature requests. And your job is to take 10 of those and drag them into the box here and rank them from 1 to 10. 1 being your most desired feature, 10 being the least. So I have already ranked what I feel is the most important for various different reasons. Either it's easy to implement, or it's something I know will save me time, or something competitive in nature for Cubase to compete with other DAWs. And I'm actually just going to go through this list, and I also have a couple more recommendations that are not within this poll. My first option is multiple track freeze unfreeze. Occasionally, I need to freeze or unfreeze anywhere from 2 to 20 different tracks. And currently, you have to go into the track individually, click on the freeze option, select the tail size, and then it processes it. And once it's done, only then can you move to the next track and do the same thing. So you can imagine how much time this type of thing would save if you're doing upwards of 10 or more tracks at a time. Another important thing is multi-track audio warp, and I tend to run into this when I edit drums and vocal tracks that are doubles and harmonies and stuff like that. Currently, when you select multiple audio events and you double click them, you can actually view the audio files stacked upon each other. As long as this button here, show all selected audio events, is enabled, you could see it layers those on top of each other. And there's going to be one that's active, which you select here, and that is the file in which you can use the warp function and create the warp edits that you're trying to achieve. And in order to do multiple instances, you have to do them individually, select to the next one, and then go ahead and match it up. The multi-track audio warp would simplify this and allow you to grab multiple audio events with the single click. So I'm sure they probably would just add a button, and then instead of having to do this on each individual track, it just affects every single track that's selected in your editor window, as I have here. And for some reason, there's this visual glitch. I don't know if it's just my computer, but it only happens with multiple audio events stacked. And I know I have a huge CPU load here. It could be my computer, I'm not sure. So Ripple Edit is a very useful feature request that I'm going to try to explain with the help of this visual aid originally made by Chris Polis. The ripple editing for a single track, what that does is once you select an event and click and drag and move it, such as demonstrated here, it moves all the events after that event as well. So instead of having to highlight all the events in the track, click, drag, move, you just have the ripple feature, which you click, drag on the event, and it moves everything after that. That can also apply for multiple tracks. So you can see here, he activates multiple, and then it moves all the events, not only on this track, but on other tracks. So I'll play that again, and you can see it's moving everything beyond that, everything beyond there. It doesn't catch this one, so it did not move it. There's also a video linked in the same post that demonstrates the power of ripple edit. And you can see here that it can also apply to duplicating events. You see how it just makes room for all these new duplicated events? So I'll leave the link to this video and this post in the description below. And speaking of the Steinberg Forum, if you have not been there, I urge you to go and explore it. There's an English forum and a German forum, and each one of these has multiple subfolders. So you can go into Cubase. If you have any other Steinberg product, there's things related to it. And you can go from new versions to old versions of Cubase, and you can go into the feature request zone, post feature requests and suggestions. You can go into the issues tab and post potential bugs or issues you're having, or find posts that have already confirmed issues that you have. Steinberg then looks at these posts and will officially confirm certain bugs and issues. They'll also create a log of some of the best feature requests and suggestions. This next feature request, modulators like LFOs for all parameters. So when I read this, I envision what Bitwig has already done. Every single device that includes VST instruments, audio processing plugins, and any third-party plugins, etc., all of these devices are, for lack of a better term, wrapped in the Bitwig protocol. So each device is listed here, and they all have access to their own dedicated modulators. So let me just pull up here. I'll do an LFO. And this is the sampler which triggers the kick drum in this project. I could then take this LFO and modulate the pitch. I could also modulate the volume, modulate the panning. And you can fine tune this to whatever you'd like. You can have a saw, or basically a saw waveform. You can do all kinds of crazy different things. And like I mentioned, you can also do this in an EQ plugin. So let's get a randomizer, and we will randomize the frequency band right here. It just kind of jumps along here. You can edit this, change it to a multi-pole so it goes both ways randomly. And like I mentioned, this also works on third-party plugins. So let me just scoot that over. There's even things like key tracking modulators. So I can put this on the attack, and the key tracking, if this was a virtual instrument, anytime you play lower notes on the keyboard, it will have less attack, and as you go up, it has progressively more attack. Like, this type of modulation sandboxing is so much fun and creative and explorative that I would love to see this implemented in Cubase. This next feature, mix console snapshots including automation. Cubase has a new feature which is mix console snapshots, which allows you to save multiple snapshots of the mix console settings. So this is very handy. Let's say I needed to have a bass heavy mix and a bass light mix, and I can send those two mixes to a client, and they can choose which of the two they prefer. When I get their preference, I can just go and click on the correct snapshot and move on from there. What's great about that is I can save it in the snapshots within one single project. I do not have to save multiple projects in order to save the information of a bass heavy mix and a bass light mix. But this snapshots does not currently support the automation information. And that's important because the automation information is changing parameters that are embedded within the mix console. What this feature request is for is that it would save all that automation information in the snapshots. So that would make it so much easier to save multiple mixes of sorts and have all of those mixes at your fingertips in the form of the snapshots. There's also another request for automation saved with track versions. The track versions does not currently save any of the automation information. So I can move this automation here on this version, move to this version, and the automation remains the same. And speaking of automation, this next one, automation shown directly on tracks, that can be very handy, especially with volume automation. There already is a feature when you open up the automation panel and go into settings, show data on tracks. This already does show all of that audio data in the tracks as well as MIDI data. This saves the need for having to have these automation lanes showing in the track itself. But for simplicity's sake, showing it directly on the tracks could save a decent amount of time, so I will leave that in there. These next two I think I have already mentioned in previous videos. This one here being moving tracks within the mix console. Currently that's not available. You see how it moves all of the track data? Like, it should be something like Alt, click, drag, and then it moves the data over. And when you simply drag across, it's just rearranging those tracks. But I would also add the ability to delete the tracks from the mix console. So when you right click, you should be able to delete a track just like you can in the project window. And the moving features should be consistent across the project windows as well as the mix console. And the next one being Bezier curves in the MIDI editor. So this surprised me when Steinberg first introduced the Bezier curves, which is this little handy guy here. They implemented that for automation, but they did not implement that for MIDI events. So things like pitch bend, this is basically the exact same thing with the dots and the pencil tools and whatnot, but there's just no Bezier curves happening within the MIDI editor. And that includes VST3 information and whatnot. So that could be a little bit more consistent, is enabling Bezier curves in there and having just a very consistent draw, line tools, Bezier curves, all that stuff can just be consistent across the entire program. And lastly, for my top 10 features is plugin sandboxing. And currently, without sandboxing, anytime a single plugin in your session fails and crashes, so it can quite easily just crash your entire project. With the sandboxing environment, that means that any plugin that crashes, it only crashes itself, and then you would have the ability to sort of reset or restart that plugin and re-enable it. So this is something that's already a feature in Bitwig Studio, and I know there's a few instances where there was plugins that were misbehaving, crashed, and all I had to do was I saw a little notification of that plugin crashing. I just reloaded the plugin and then continued on my merry way. Okay, so having said that, this is quite an exhaustive list of things, but I would still add a couple more worthwhile points here. One thing is automatic tail size detection when rendering in place and when freezing. I've seen it in other DAWs that automatically detect the tail size and then they'll adjust that accordingly. Another thing for render in place is having the ability to choose to render down to mono, stereo, 5.1, etc. Next one is copy pasting a plugin with sidechain settings. Should keep that sidechain information. So on my bass here, I have a sidechain which is triggered by the kick drum. So whenever I copy paste the same exact plugin, you can see it's still activated, but it didn't save the sidechain information. So I still have to go in there, find the kick drum that I had, set the level correctly, make sure it's all correct. If it was pre or post fader, I'd have to make sure that was correct. Seems to me that if it's going to save the information of, input level, the drive, the output, the fact that it has activated the sidechain and whatnot, they should be able to just also add the saved sidechain input information. And lastly, this kind of ties into the multiple editing. It would be great if you can also edit MIDI events and audio events in the same way. So as demonstrated before, it would be great if I could select all the events from these highlighted MIDI events and adjust them accordingly. Instead of having to adjust it on the single one, select the next audio event and then adjust that. Even better is if I could edit both MIDI events and audio events in a similar way. So having them stack visually here, at the very least just stack visually, so that whenever I make audio events changes, it will also be able to see the MIDI events there, and if they implement the ability to edit them similarly, that would be fantastic. So again, these are my minor additions. I am voting for these top 10 things. You should get on this poll and go and find all the things that you are looking forward to seeing. There's a couple honorable mentions. The ability to export video, that would be really cool. I know there's also people that really want full colored tracks in the mix console. So currently you can see the track colors only color this tiny little section. So they want to see the entire thing colored. Loop-based production features like clip launchers. I don't think they can fully revamp Cubase to be like what Ableton and Bitwig are like. If that is what they mean by this, then I would easily put that in my top 3 requests. Earlier this year, I was able to visit the Steinberg headquarters in Hamburg in Germany, and I had the pleasure of meeting the fellow who was in charge of taking care of feature requests and basically aggregating those requests into action and making those features available for future iterations of Cubase. And it could have been Matthias here, the moderator. I'm not sure. But we had a great little chat about the hundreds of various different requests that Steinberg gets for new features. And it's cool because they basically dedicated a fair amount of resources to collecting and understanding what it is that Cubase users want. So this poll is one of those things. I really did want to go through all of these feature requests and sort of thoroughly explain things and to get you thinking about what you would like to see in Cubase. So thank you for watching, take care, and bye-bye.